Hello there everybody, Scotia here, and welcome to my second review for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 9, the JoJoLands. If you missed my previous review for the first chapter of the JoJoLands, I would highly recommend checking that out now. If you want a brief recap, I very much enjoyed the chapter. I thought it was a great start to a new part of JoJo's. I was pretty high on a lot of things. Some things I wasn't keen on, like the names, but since then I've gotten over those things. I think as well, if you're new to me and my channel and my opinions on JoJo's, I would watch that first video just to give an idea, because at the start I talk about my personal rankings of JoJo, just to give you an idea of what I like in the series and what I don't like. It's not in depth, but it's kind of like a brief overview. So like I said, if you haven't checked out the first review for the first chapter yet, please go check that out now. It should have appeared in the top corner by now. So yeah, please go check that out and then come back here. Otherwise, let's get started with the review of the second chapter of the JoJoLands, which I believe is titled The Japanese Person on the Island of Hawaii. So at the end of the previous chapter, we were told that basically the crew is going to perform a heist of a diamond that belongs to a Japanese tourist, and the crew was consisting of Jodio, Dragona, Paco, and the at the time unnamed senior of Jodio's, who is named in this chapter, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But instead of starting with the heist, we instead start with a scene of Jodio involved in another drug deal with a woman who identifies herself as Kate's friend, and this deal is taking place outside, as opposed to the previous deal in the last chapter taking place in the school. And I think Jodio has a line after this where he even says that, the idea of, expanding their horizons and selling outside of the school was Meryl's idea. So, seems like he has no choice really, but either way, something seems a bit off with this deal. And the woman that, is wanting to buy drugs from Jodio, she seems very sketchy just in general. And, Jodio has these moments where he's a bit back and forth of you kind of seem suspicious, but, if you were a cop, say, But we get some good scenes from Jodio here and a good showcase of his, volatile personality that we saw in the first chapter. I do like how he flip-flops between telling the woman to go away and it's like, hey, it's, a crime for an adult like you to talk to a minor like me, and then the next minute he's like, oh yeah, sure, if you're passionate enough, then, be passionate about this whole deal. It's just another good showcase from him. But as the deal goes on and the woman flip-flops between wanting to buy the drugs or not, and Jodio eventually is like, just go through with it, blah blah blah, then she eventually convinces him that if she were a cop, all he would have to do is ask her, and by law she would have to say that yes, she is. So Jodio does so. He says, are you a cop? She says no. She puts the money down, and then Paco shows up with the drugs and says, oh, you stepped on it. And as soon as she picks up the drugs, she pulls out the gun, and she is indeed a police officer undercover. Very obvious. I think a lot of people are probably going to tell from the beginning that this was a sting operation, but obviously Jodio and Paco had no idea. And a whole swarm of officers come down and they tackle Paco, and Jodio gets put in handcuffs. And then we see the return of two characters I definitely did not think we'd ever see again in this whole part, as we see the two cops who harassed and assaulted Jodio and Dragona at the start of the previous chapter. And yeah, they're still sick fucks, I guess. The cop with the mustache, he's still being the same type of cop that he was in the previous chapter. But fortunately for Jodio, it doesn't get any worse despite the cops' threats, as Jodio promptly uses November Rain to basically wash away all the drugs and the evidence against them and Paco for, being involved in this drug trade, and then eventually uses November Rain to scare off the cops, as they know previously from the last time that they encountered Jodio that, if the rain drops and they get hit by it, they're in trouble. So basically Jodio and Paco get away with it all, and Paco has a line where he's like, you know what, I'm starting to like this guy. And yeah, it's just a good scene. Another good demonstration of how useful November Rain can be, even if it might not be handy in a fight, which granted we've not seen any character really in a fight, but just another good showcase for November Rain. And there's a really good panel actually where he's talking about how he wants to give the cops a piece of his mind, because he just thinks they're disgusting people, and he wants to give them a piece of his mind, but he's like, you know what, there's no point saying anything unnecessary, because at the end of the day, those who can't see it never will, and by it he means his stand in November Rain and stands in general. And it's just a good thing of stand users are just in another realm compared to non-stand users, and I like that. Even cops, people of the law, people with guns and authority, they don't have a stand. There's nothing they can really do against people who do have stands. And I just kind of like that, and I like the viewpoint that Jodio shares, where it's like there's no point bothering with people who don't have stands because they can't see it. They're not on that level. But yeah, just a good bit there. I quite enjoyed that. At the end of the scene, we then get a brief flashback featuring Jodio and his mother, where basically we find out that in school, Jodio did a personality test and was basically diagnosed as having antisocial personality disorder and was diagnosed as a psychopath. And after that first chapter, man, I can kind of believe it. Obviously, he doesn't, see it himself as that. And he even has a line here, which I think is good, where he says, you know, being labelled as antisocial, like being labelled as that, like it hurt him. And I think that's a very true thing. I think people, even who are, you know, like antisocial, I imagine being labelled as such, especially if you don't feel like you are, I could imagine that would sting a bit. And obviously his mother is very upset at the news. She doesn't want to believe it. She demands the money back for the test, because I think he says they have to pay for the test. And it's just a good scene, and you know, it's good, a bit of an insight into kind of Jodio and like his relationship with his mother and like how she views him. Obviously he's her son and she doesn't want to, I would, you know, expect there to be some kind of denial there in terms of, you know, my son can't be like that. You know, I don't know if I'd straight up label him as a psychopath. I definitely think we could see that side of him as the part goes on, you know, if Dragona gets in danger later on and stuff like that. But I can definitely see the antisocial part of it, because even in this chapter later on, he doesn't really talk to anybody else directly that much outside of Dragona. But yeah, this was an interesting scene, and you know, given everything else that happens in this chapter, I'm glad that Araki was able to kind of throw in a bit more of a personal kind of, not so much personal, but a bit of a like mental kind of insight into Jodio a bit. I did appreciate that. I thought that was a good addition, and you know, this is definitely something that I'm looking forward to maybe being explored in, you know, later chapters and arcs in this series. We then end everything, the flashback and the scene with the DAA sting operation, with him basically wondering to himself, like, can I ever be happy? And Jodio's like, yeah, I probably can, but at the same time, just the fact that, you know, people like these cops, these slimy people, are hidden everywhere in society and life. Like, I will never truly escape them, no matter how much work I put in, no matter how much money I get. Like, these people will be there, like, they're hidden everywhere, I can't avoid them. And that factoid in his mind, like, just wants to, like, drives him insane. It's like, he makes him want to lose his mind. And again, the whole scene, just another really good insight into Jodio. Honestly, I'm really blown away at how much I'm actually liking this character. I've seen all these, you know, comparisons to Giorno, and I said in the previous review that, you know, Giorno's not my favourite JoJo, not really even close. There's some days I would honestly put him at the bottom. But yeah, like, if this is an example of, you know, Araki trying to do another type of Giorno type character, I think this is already far better than, you know, than Giorno itself. I don't think that he's so much like one-to-one with Giorno, or like that Araki's trying to do another type of Jodio. I think there are similarities, absolutely, but I think so far Jodio is pretty unique. I think he's definitely one of the more unique JoJos in the series. I honestly already like him more than Josuke and Giorno. And like, again, don't hate any of these JoJos. I don't hate Giorno, even if, you know, I don't like him that much. I think he's a good character, but, you know, compared to other JoJos is kind of like what I mean. But I think even then, I'm really liking Jodio. And obviously things can change. Like, Josuke had a big shift in personality towards the end of part 8. Well, not much towards the end, but like, there's kind of like, there's the first, you know, half of JoJolian Josuke, and then there's the latter half of JoJolian Josuke, where the kind of like, the similarities, obviously he's not completely different, but I feel like a lot of the kind of charm of Josuke kind of went away towards the end of part 8, which I thought was a shame. Not to say, you know, Josuke is bad, but I think already I'm definitely liking Jodio a lot more. At least in terms of potential, I think this character could end up being really, really, really good by the end of this part. Like, I think once his whole journey is complete and he's learned the lessons that Araki has planned for him, I think Jodio will absolutely end up being like one of the better like JoJos in my opinion, like up there for me personally with like Joseph and Jolene. So that's great. You know, it's really great to say. Like, I really didn't have that many expectations for Jodio before this part started, but now that we're here, and obviously still very early in, but you know, I'm invested in seeing more of him, and I think from what we've seen of him already, I think this is definitely one of my favourite JoJos, or has the chance to be one of my favourite JoJos. But yeah, good stuff from Jodio in the start of this chapter. You know, I am glad we kind of took a bit of a detour with this scene and the flashback before we actually got to the meat of the chapter, which is what we're going to be getting into now. So after an unspecified amount of time, the gang finally get to Kona Airport on the island, where they are to infiltrate the Japanese tourist mansion and steal the diamond. They're basically just waiting for Jodio Senior, who arrives and is like, oh sorry it took so long, and everyone's bored and pissed because they've been waiting like 2 hours, and Dragona gets mad at the guy because he's like, you know, we only got so much time on this island, like I don't want to be here overnight, I want to be on the last plane out of here. And you know, after being calmed down, and you know, Jodio Senior is like, oh, you know, it's fine. We finally get the name of this guy after Paco asks who they are, and this is Usagi Aloha Oi. And sorry if I absolutely butchered the pronunciation of that last name, but I've finally got a name for this guy. It's been a while, obviously, well, not that long, but the first chapter. But yeah, I mean, I always kind of figured we'd get the name of this guy in the second chapter. I thought because we waited so long, it might have been something special, but no, it's, you know, pretty standard name, I guess. Well, I say standard. It's standard for JoJo's. It's nothing too crazy. I actually saw a leak which actually ended up being bullshit. I saw something online. Apparently this guy, like, it was rumoured at one point that his name was going to be Vinegar Doppio. from part 5, but I'm glad that ended up being fake, because I do like Doppio a lot, and it would have been very confusing to have to like specify which one I'm talking about, but you know, we don't have to worry about that. So this has finally got this guy's name, he's Usagi, and yeah, it's just got a brief intro with him. He's 17, so he's only just a bit older than Jodio, and he has a line where he's like, oh, you know, the car's only going to be like, the rental car they mean, it's only going to be like $30 each from all of you. And then later on, as they're leaving, Dragona hears someone from the car rental place going like, oh, we got a great deal, only $90, and Dragona's like, hang on, like, why did we all give him 30 then if we only needed 90? So, you know, this guy's a bit of a swindler. His personality, because obviously he gets to, he probably shines the most in this chapter, which makes sense because, you know, he wasn't in the first chapter that much. His personality seems interesting, definitely more of a jokester type character, which is cool. We didn't really get one of them in part 8, the main core cast of JoJolian, which was pretty small, all things considered. I guess Joshu was kind of the closest we got to a jokester, but he was a very different type of jokester. This guy seems more kind of like a little bit of a swindler, but he just kind of seems not goofy, but, you know, kind of innocent, but he at the same time has a side to him, I think, which we'll see more as the part goes on, where, you know, he's funny and mostly harmless, but he's kind of a jackass at times. But yeah, definitely interested to see more of him. Can't wait to see, you know, what he gets up to, and also as well to see if he actually is part of this group or not. I could see something happening where he maybe screws them over later on or something, but, you know, we'll have to wait and see. But for now, I like the guy, I think he seems alright. So yeah, finally got the name and got a bit more of his personality, which is nice. We also finally get to see his stand, and I've said in the last chapter review that I really like the stand so far in this part. That definitely continues here, because we get introduced to the Mate Kudasai, which I believe is a King Crimson song. And the Mate Kudasai is another really cute, small looking stand. Like, I love the designs of the stands so far in this part, like all of them so far. Obviously, I mean, I don't think we've really seen anything of Paco's yet, which I'm assuming means that his muscles are basically the stand. We'll have to see, I guess. But so far, November Rain, Smooth Operators, and now the Mate Kudasai. Honestly, so far, 10 out of 10 stand designs on all of them. Not obviously visually not my favourite, but like, I just love how all of them are just so unique. And these are like the main cast's, you know, stand designs. Definitely, it makes me, like I said in the previous one, like, it makes me very excited to see what type of stand fights we're going to get, because I don't think they're really going to be like fights as we've seen them in the series, where like more physical punching type stuff. I definitely think a lot of the fights in this part are going to be very strategic based, because a lot of these stand abilities are just so unique, but in the sense of like, I don't really get how some of these are going to work in a fight, and I don't mean that in the bad way. Like, I'm genuinely excited to see how these work in a fight. But basically, what the Mate Kudasai does is it can turn into anything that exists, but it's based on what somebody else wants. So when Usagi is like, you know, trying to start using the ability, he tells Dragona like, oh, tell me you want a camera, and Dragona's like, okay, I want a camera, and then he goes, okay, and then he uses the stand to basically make a second camera, and it's like he couldn't use it for himself. Like, he couldn't tell the stand, oh, make a camera. It's like, no, because it doesn't work on what he wants, it's what other people want. That's so fascinating. That's such an interesting way. I really cannot wait to see how that gets used. I definitely think this is going to be a very versatile stand. I think it seems kind of, I guess, weak now. I wouldn't use the word weak, but I can see some other people saying it's weak, but I think this looks, I can already tell this is going to be a very like cool stand throughout this part. But yeah, so basically the stand turns itself into a second camera, and it doesn't replace the other camera, it just makes two cameras. But what it essentially does is the left camera, which is the real one, shows one thing, and then the right camera shows the same thing but completely different. So the example is used is when Usagi looks into the camera, the left camera, the real one, his face appears normal, but when he looks into the right camera, his face is completely different. And again, I just really like this ability. I think it's so cool. Like, I really cannot wait to see how this gets used. But basically, the crew go through the mansion, and we see for the first time a brief glimpse of the Japanese tourist. And I've got a lot to say about the tourist, don't you worry. We'll get to that at the end. We're very close to the end now. But we see the tourists swimming, and everyone goes to scout out the mansion and, you know, look around and see if they can get away in. But Jodio goes to look at the actual Japanese tourist himself, and he looks at them through the binoculars as the person's in the pool. And Jodio amazingly recognizes this person. He goes, hang on, I know who this is. I read their manga and I watch their anime online. And amazingly, the final page of this chapter, the Japanese tourist that everybody was speculating about, some people said it was going to be Josuke from part 8, some people said it was going to be Joshu. My personal expectation was that it was going to be Tsurugi, but like an older Tsurugi, so that we wouldn't see him, like we wouldn't know it was him first, because obviously he'd be older. But no, turns out none of us really had any idea what it was going to be. The Japanese tourist is none other than Rohan Kashibi from part 4. And I say part 4 because obviously that's the part that most people will know him from. And this is going to be a wider topic. This is pretty, but like that's the end of the chapter, by the way, in case you're wondering. The final shot is that the Japanese tourist is Rohan, and it says at the end the target's name is Rohan Gashibi. And man, I genuinely did not expect this to happen at all. If you are in the JoJo fan base and you interact with the JoJo community in any way, Discords, Twitters, Reddit, stuff like that, be prepared for a horrible month. Because this is going to absolutely ruin conversations until we get the next chapter, or even if the next chapter doesn't answer anything. We are basically going to get a lot of conversation and arguments about the universes again, because the end of part 6 started this all off of is the Irene verse that was created at the end of Stone Ocean, is that the Steel Ball Run universe? And this has been a hotly debated topic for years, ever since basically Steel Ball Run started. And personally, I've always felt that the way it goes is that Steel Ball Run, JoJolian, and now the JoJoLands are completely its own thing. Completely new universe, separate from everything, from the main universe, from the Irene verse. It's its own thing, its own characters. Obviously taking names and stands, from pre-existing characters, but, doing it in its own thing, with its own look and, stuff like that. Like Johnny Joestar is Jonathan Joestar, but he's not Jonathan Joestar, if that makes sense. If you read JoJo, that probably does make sense. If you don't, I don't know why you're here. Yeah, so that's always been the thing, and I've always felt like the Irene verse was basically... Parts 1 to 5 still happened, but just the only difference was that Poochie wasn't around, because he died before the universe could be fully reset. So basically a new universe was created without Poochie in it, which led to basically part 6 being what it is at the end of part 6 with Irene and all that. And that's been my assumption for a while now, and I still feel like that's the case. But now this certainly throws a wrench into the works, because there's 2 directions here that this goes. One, this is Rohan Gashibi from part 4, the original universe, and that muddies a lot of things up. That really goes against pretty much everything we've been told and shown from JoJo since part 7. And then the other option is that this is the alt-universe version of Rohan Gashibi, and he just looks exactly the same. And I personally feel like it's the latter. I don't think this is the original Rohan. I think that just muddies things up to such a level that it is possible, I guess, but I just think it messes things up so much. But I trust Araki enough to know that he knows making this the original Rohan would just completely mess things up timeline-wise and universe-wise, and it's not worth it just to get Rohan back. I think the far more likelier option is that this is an alt-universe Rohan who just happens to look the same, because this has happened before. It's very rare. The only other time that this has happened is Diego in part 7, and obviously Diego was dressed differently and his hair was a bit different at times, I think, but for the most part he looked exactly like Dio. He looked like, if you look at Dio part 6, the way Araki drew him in part 6, and then look at Diego in part 7, they look the same. Diego in part 7, physically he looks like Dio, he just dresses differently. I feel like this is another similar thing where I feel like this is another Rohan Gashibi from an alternate universe who's called Rohan Gashibi. He's a manga artist, but I don't think this is the same one. I feel like more than anything Araki is having fun here. I feel like he's doing this because he likes Rohan. It's been discussed to death, in a very well-known fact that Araki really likes Rohan. Some people say he's in love with him. At this rate, I probably would agree with that. He's definitely is a big fan of the character, and I think he knows that people are going to argue about this and discuss it in depth until it gets clarified. Already people are very much assuming that this means that this is part 4 in the whole universe, the original universe, that all happened, is colliding, and JoJoLands and Steel Ball Run, that all happened. I very much don't think that's the case. If that is the case, I'd be very disappointed. I feel like one of the big strengths that came from part 6's ending going into part 7 and onwards is that Araki had the guts to completely just wipe everything and start again, basically from scratch, with a new drawing board to begin off of, without having to tie himself to the past. And I think having Rohan from the original universe, or even from the Irene verse Rohan, show up, and it just, oh look, Irene and all that always happened in Steel Ball Run universe, I think that'd be very weak. I feel like that would go against a lot of what he did, not just in part 6, but in part 7 and 8. But like I said, I have confidence in him that that's not the case. He said before that he's had fun with certain aspects in writing the series, like naming Irene at the end of part 6 after Gorgeous Irene, which is an older series of his prior to JoJo. So yeah, like I said, it's something that is going to cause a lot of debate. I'm glad I'm not in that many JoJo communities online, because this is just going to happen. It's going to be a mess. If you're in a community, deep in a community, I feel bad for you, because it's not going to be pretty. People are going to be arguing about this. If it doesn't get solved next chapter, it's going to be months of this, of people just arguing, oh, this is the Irene verse, oh, JoJo, it's going to be awful, it's going to be ugly. But, I think this is really cool. I'm more than anything, I'm just really interested in seeing where this goes. Because obviously this is going to lead, like the first fight is absolutely, I think, going to be Rohan with Made in Heaven against Jodio and the others. I think that's going to be so cool, just so interesting. I think it is pretty much guaranteed that he's going to have Made in Heaven still, because when other characters, from the OG universe that got brought over into the Steelboy Run universe, when they've come back with their stands, for the most part, they've had the same stand. Like Kira in Part 8 has had Killer Queen, Joseph at the end of Part 8 had Hermit Purple. It was never named as such, but it was basically Hermit Purple. Diego having the world at the end of Part 7. You know, it's not new. I think the only thing that's really kind of catching people off guard here is the fact he looks identical to how he looks, you know, in the previous stuff like the Spoke Rohan Kashibi and Part 4 itself. Yeah, I think that's what's going to throw people off the most. But like I said, there is precedent for this, but only like one time with, you know, Diego looking exactly like Dio. It's certainly interesting, and like I said, it'd be interesting to see how this goes. Like, is Rohan going to join the main crew? That would be weird. A good weird. I think that could be very interesting, but, you know, the idea of Rohan interacting with all of these Zoomers, you know, 15-year-old Jodio and stuff like that, I think that's going to be very interesting. But yeah, a great reveal at the end. But I'm going to leave things here. There's literally a police helicopter outside my window. I don't know if you can hear it or not, but I'm going to wrap the things up here quickly before fate keeps, you know, ruining my life with these recordings. It always seems to happen to me when I'm recording something. But yeah, I really enjoyed this chapter. I thought this was a great chapter. Obviously, this stuff with Rohan at the end is going to absolutely eclipse everything else that happens in this chapter. But overall, I thought this was a really good chapter. There's some really good stuff at the beginning of this, some good group interactions, another great insight into Jodio and his mind, and, you know, a bit more of his personality and stuff like that. Great stuff. Another great chapter. I honestly think so far this is probably one of the best starts to a chapter, like to a part ever. Like, you know, I think just off the top of my head, maybe Part 4 had a good start as well. Part 7, I think even Part 7 wasn't as good this early in, you know, 2 chapters in and I'm already hooked. I can't wait to see what happens next. I think pacing wise, Araki has really solved a lot of his issues that he had with JoJolian. JoJolian had some really bad pacing at times, things just lasting far longer than they needed to, things just dragging on and like taking so long to get to the point. Like, I'm already kind of shocked we're already like at the villa or the mansion of the Japanese tourist, which is Rohan. Like, I'm shocked we're already here. I honestly thought it would be another chapter or 2 before we got here. I thought we'd spend more time, you know, getting to know the gang as we like got to here than to here, but we're already here and we already know who it is, and it's Rohan. Man, it's good to see Araki back on form, honestly. Like, I don't hate JoJolian. I don't think JoJolian is bad, but I just don't think JoJolian played to the strengths of Araki's writing as well. This already seems like he's just having, like, honestly, it just seems like he's having fun. You know, I definitely get the feeling he's just enjoying this part more in terms of just getting into things and just exploring the character and just having more fun with things and not tying himself down to a mystery and, you know, uncovering the truth. I think this is just, it's a lot more basic, but I think it's more enjoyable because of that. So yeah, great stuff from Araki. Cannot wait for chapter 3. I really cannot wait to see how Rohan plays into this. Like I said though, I'm going to say this again dozens of times. I'm very confident that this is an alt universe version. I don't think this is the original Rohan at all. If this is the alt universe Rohan, I think that's really cool. I'm surprised he's in part 9. I honestly thought if they were going to do an alt universe Rohan, he would have done one in part 8, you know, given that was in Morio. But you know, who am I to judge Araki or question him? But yeah, good stuff here. I'm going to wrap this up, like I said, before the police helicopter ruins more of my day. So yeah, good stuff. Definitely going to come back for chapter 3, which I think is should be next month. I don't know if it's actually been confirmed or not. But whatever happens, whenever chapter 3 drops, I'll be here. I'll be doing a review for it. Until then, thank you all for watching, and I shall see you all later. Yeah, goodbye.
We await your return, warrior.